Good evening. I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to this special edition of APTN National News, where we're taking a deeper look at the treaty fishery. A second Mi'kmaq First Nation launched their own self-regulated treaty lobster fishery after talks with the Department of Fisheries broke down. Chief Doreen Bernard of the Lennox Island First Nation says her community could not wait any longer. APTN's Angel Moore was at the launch and starts off our coverage.
That's how you protect treaty rights. You get out there and you do it and you practice it. That's the only way to do it.
That's Chief Darlene Bernard as her community gets ready to defy federal regulations and launch the Lennox Island Treaty Protected Fishery from the community's wharf, located off the coast of northwestern Prince Edward Island. Fishers are going out to harvest lobster and earn a moderate livelihood under the community's management plan. Bernard says the federal government has not respected Mi'kmaq treaty rights.
They have a responsibility to create space within the fishery for the treaty fishery, for First Nations to become involved in the commercial fishery, and they failed to do that.
Following the launch, there was a ceremony at the wharf. Elder Mathilda Knockwood Snake could barely contain her pride.
When I seen the boat go out, and I felt like screaming. I just felt like cheering and just be happy, you know, that they're able to do that and that they're proud to do it.
Lennox Island is the second community to launch their own self-regulated treaty-protected fishery. Sipekne'katik First Nation treaty fishery launched in 2020 in southwestern Nova Scotia and was met with violence from non-Indigenous fishers who said the fishery was illegal. But it was a different scene at Lennox Island Wharf. A few RCMP vehicles stopped by, but otherwise it was a regular day as Mi'kmaq commercial fishers also prepared to haul crab. Blake Bernard, who monitors the treaty fishery, said the DFO was nearby in the water.
There was a federal fishery officer sitting out there with some scopes, just watching. Other than that, went off without a hitch.
The fishers will sell their catch to the band, who has their own license to buy the lobster and sell it to other buyers. APTN News asked the Department of Fisheries and Oceans about Lennox Island's fishery. In an emailed statement, the DFO said, Fisheries and Oceans Canada is focused on solutions that protect Indigenous rights, all those who work in Canada's fishing industry, to ensure everyone has an opportunity to benefit from fishing. The Lennox Island Treaty Fishery Management Plan includes a total of 1,000 traps for the commercial season, with 100 traps per person. A Lennox Island fisher told APTN News the treaty traps had yet to be seized by fisheries officers, as went to air. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Lennox Island First Nation.
Southwestern Nova Scotia has one of the most lucrative lobster areas, and a Mi'kmaq community has launched their food, social, and ceremonial lobster fishery using their own management plan, while rejecting the plan from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. As Angel Moore reports, the harvest is conflict-free on the waters for now.
Cheyenne Francis dropped 5 lobster traps during the evening in St. Mary's Bay when the tide was high, the first day of the Sipekne'katik First Nations food, social, and ceremonial fishery season. Francis is following her community's management plan and not the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
You know, not just what my grandparents, my dad taught me, and, you know, this stuff that, you know, it's not just teaching them, but also, you know, the generations to come.
Each member of Sipekne'katik can catch up to 40 marketable lobsters per trap per day, and the catch must be reported according to the community plan. Earlier in the day, fisheries officers made their presence known. Francis says that is harassment.
When the non-natives are fishing, I don't see them sitting there at the wharves and boarding all their boats when they don't have permission to.
The catch is used for food, social, and ceremonial purposes and cannot be sold. Frances says her catch will provide a feast for a sweat and feed her crew and community members. Frances expects DFO officers will haul up her traps since she's not following their procedure, but she will keep on harvesting.
Put more out there. Like I said, you can't stop us. We're just going to keep going. Like, that's not in us.
More Mi'kmaq fishers are expected to arrive here this week and launch their boats. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Saulnieville Wharf, Nova Scotia.
There were many more developments this year in Nova Scotia over treaty lobster fisheries, including one Mi'kmaq community who launched their treaty lobster fishery in St. Mary's Bay, only to have fisheries officers seize their gear and their catch. The move comes as 3 Mi'kmaq fishers appeared in Digby Provincial Court, while the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says Canada needs to implement Mi'kmaq rights. Here again is Angel Moore.
This Facebook video shows DFO officers hauling away crates of lobster harvested by Sipekne'katik Mi'kmaq fishermen under their community's treaty fishery management plan. But that plan is not recognized by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Fisherman Robert Sack is defiant, saying he'll drop more traps.
We're out here to prove a point, because if we don't fight for this, then we're not going to have nothing. And that's what they're doing, backing us into a corner until we finally give up, and that's what they're waiting for, but that's not going to happen.
James Nevin of the Sipekne'katik First Nation was just in court the day before he prepared these traps, defending his treaty rights in Digby. He was charged in 2018 for unauthorized fishing, fishing without authorized tags, and possessing lobster, something he calls a waste of time.
So it's our treaty right to fish. We're the only reserve that hasn't signed any type of an agreement for, like with DFO, and DFO is trying to pressure us to sign some type of an agreement so they can regulate us.
The Mi'kmaq fishermen harvest lobster to earn a moderate livelihood under peace and friendship treaties, rights upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada. Fisheries officers made their presence known on the waters as Sack and his crew dropped traps in St. Mary's Bay, known as a lucrative lobster area. Sipekne'katik guardians kept an eye on Mi'kmaq boats and gear.
It sucks, really. It's a shame that we got to do this. But like I said, they're trying to back us into a corner for like the past 30 years, right? Because we're like the only reserve that hasn't signed.
Sipekne'katik authorized 50 tags per boat to harvest lobster till the commercial season starts, but the Department of Fisheries said in an email to APTN News, DFO has a critical role to play in managing the shared resource, and fishing must occur during the established seasons and with a DFO authorized license. And any unauthorized fishing activity may be subject to enforcement action. Robert Sack fishes to support his family, says treaty rights are not government regulated.
They just want us to follow their paper and their paper only, and what they say goes, and we're letting them know that this is a treaty right for every band member.
A treaty right supported by the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination said in a letter to Canada, the rights-based fisheries that were affirmed in the Marshall Decision affecting Mi'kmaq communities and other First Nations have yet to be implemented by the Government of Canada, and the lack of implementation has led to rising tensions and violence. SAC hopes the support of the United Nations will help Canada recognize Mi'kmaq treaty rights for future generations.
If we stop fighting, our kids ain't going to have any kind of future. You know, we're just going to be, I don't know what they want us to do. Go back to the reserve and just stay there, or I don't know what they expect us to do, but we're here, we're fighting, and we're not going to stop.
Nevin's court case will continue in November. In the meantime, Sipekne'katik fishermen will continue to treaty fish. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Saulnieville, Nova Scotia.
Time for a quick break, but when we return, we're headed back to the courtroom and out on the water. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of APTN National News. In a Digby, Nova Scotia provincial courtroom, closing arguments were presented in October, where 3 Mi'kmaq fishers were facing charges of illegal fishing. However, they say it is their treaty right to earn a moderate livelihood. Angel Moore reports.
Earlier in this courthouse, 3 fishermen of the Sipekne'katik First Nation appeared in court. They have been charged for fishing lobster without tags, fishing over the food social ceremonial limit, and violating the Fisheries Act. Lawyer Mike McDonald represents the 3 men and says their harvest is a treaty right authorized by the band.
All Aboriginal rights, according to the Supreme Court of Canada, is that they're communal rights. And so the authorization to fish came from the band. Both the fishery manager and former chief both stated that the band at the time that my clients were arrested, they were authorized the band to go out and fish for a moderate livelihood, and that's exactly what my clients were doing.
The charges stem from almost 4 years ago, when James Nevin, Logan Piero Howe, and Leon Knockwood were harvesting lobster to earn a moderate livelihood. That's when officers from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans met them at the Sissebu Wharf in southwestern Nova Scotia.
They shouldn't have charged us in the first place, and I think it's just a tactic to try to slow us down and, you know, discourage us. But I've continued to keep fishing ever since, you know, this charge happened, so it's not stopping me.
Last month, Nevin fished under Sipekne'katik's treaty fishery, harvesting lobster to earn a moderate livelihood, a right he says the court should recognize.
I hope the judge makes the right decision to, you know, prove that we aren't guilty for what we did, because we're doing the same thing, like I said previously, and we're innocent. You know.
Presiding Judge Timothy Laundrie has reserved his decision till next January. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Digby, Nova Scotia.
Meanwhile, on the west coast, after a long court battle, 5 Nechako nations on Vancouver Island were preparing to exercise their right to harvest crabs commercially. But that right could mean some non-First Nation harvesters could lose their livelihoods. APTN's Lee Wilson has that story.
Wickaninish, Cliff Atleo of a Hausa First Nation, says it is welcome news that the Nechako 5 nations will start to harvest crab commercially. He says late last year, Fisheries and Oceans Canada sent a notice they can take part in the commercial crab fishery. The Nechako have a plan, and they want to be part of the management of a sustainable fishery in their territories.
We've created an economic model that we can adapt to fishing of any species, and so we'll be able to figure out pretty quick what it's going to take to actually be involved in a sustainable fishery of crab.
The announcement is a long time coming. The Nechako have been in court fighting for fishing rights since 2003. The nation celebrated a huge victory when in 2009, the BC Supreme Court ruled they have a right to harvest species of fish in their territory. Then, in April of last year, the decision was confirmed in the BC Court of Appeal. In an email statement to APTN News, DFO says they consulted with the 5 nations to gradually implement the crab fishery on Vancouver Island. DFO has arrived at an agreement with the 5 nations to phase in their allocation increase, with some of the increase being implemented in the 2022-23 fishing season and the balance in the 23-24 fishing season. But to give the 5 nations licenses, DFO reduced the commercial crab traps for non-First Nation harvesters. Commercial crab trap totals have been reduced for the 2022 fishing season to provide an increased allocation for the 5 nations right-based crab fishery as directed by the BC Court of Appeal. The reduced current commercial crab allocation to accommodate First Nations has some crab harvesters worried that they aren't going to survive. Wickaninish believes the commercial crab harvesters haven't been treated fairly, but says the 2 parties are building a working relationship.
They have been mistreated just like we have been, And so we're in the process of establishing a working relationship where actually those that are going to be pushed out will offer up their crabs for sale for our fishers, and we'll gear up accordingly to accommodate the reallocation of the crab to our people.
We reached out to the BC Crab Fishers Association, but did not get a response before airtime. Wickeninish is hopeful that all 5 Nechako nations will be able to take part in the crab fishery, along with existing crab harvesters.
Very good interest by young people to be part of this industry. And the Crab Association has been very open and willing to share their knowledge about the industry. And so I think that I look forward to when things settle down and we can get a handle on management in a good way.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the concerns over fish farms on the West Coast. Stick around. Welcome back to a special edition of APTN National News, where we're taking a deeper look at the fisheries. Fisheries and Oceans Canada issued 2-year renewals for fish farms outside of the Discovery Islands in British Columbia. It says they are committed to a transition away from all fish farms in the province by 2025. One Vancouver Island hereditary chief who opposes the fish farms believes the renewals are harmful to wild salmon stocks. APTN's Lee Wilson has that story.
79 fish farm licenses on BC's coast are set to expire at the end of this month. Scientists and First Nations have raised concerns about open net pen Atlantic salmon farms in BC waters due to the risk posed to wild salmon populations. The Discovery Islands are a group of islands located between Vancouver Island and mainland BC. The fish farms there are controversial because most Fraser River salmon must pass the farms on their migration route. Last week, Fisheries and Oceans Canada announced the fish farm facilities operating outside of the Discovery Islands will receive 2-year renewals. Lakwatu Hereditary Chief George Quacksister says the fish farms outside of the Discovery Islands will still have a major impact on wild salmon. Chief Quacksister Jr. believes the current salmon runs are critical for rebuilding salmon stocks, and the renewals are a risk.
All the way up Fort Hardy way, they take a huge toll on the baby fish. There's people up and on those farms when baby sockeye are rocking out, those pens were just tons of baby sockeye in the pens, you know what I mean? So basically it's all salmon farms do the same harm as the Discovery Island.
In a statement, the DFO added there will be stricter rules and requirements for fish farm licenses. The federal government remained committed to transitions from fish farms on BC's coast, but will meet with governments, First Nations, and stakeholders. Wild Pacific salmon are an iconic keystone in British Columbia that are facing historic threats. Our government is taking action to protect and return wild salmon to abundance and ensure Canada is a global leader in sustainable aquaculture. Working together with First Nations, the province, industry, and British Columbians, we will transition the aquaculture industry to one which leads new technology while reducing or eliminating interactions with wild Pacific salmon. Fish farm operators and some of the First Nations in the territory the farms operate have expressed concerns about jobs if the licenses are not renewed. A joint statement released by Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance and the BC Salmon Farmers Association called these renewals a positive step. This announcement will give us an opportunity to work with all levels of government, including First Nations, to secure a future that will benefit Indigenous and non-Indigenous coastal communities and support the continuation and protection and restoration of wild Pacific salmon. DFO stated they will share their transition plan from open pen net fish farms in coming weeks. Hereditary Chief Quacksister Jr. fears government delaying removing all fish farm licenses will hurt First Nations' way of life and all those who count on wild salmon.
Like I say, I will never understand how the three governments want to wipe out all life on our BC coastal waters. They're destroying everybody's way of life and everything, not just First Nations.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
After nearly a dozen sturgeon were found dead in the Nechako River in September, 3 BC First Nations are expressing concern, and they're calling mining company Rio Tinto and the federal and provincial governments to start doing a better job of managing the river. Here again is APTN's Lee Wilson.
Sipekne'katik and Wutan First Nations along the Nechako River expressed concerns about the low water due to the Kenny Dam, which was built by Rio Tinto Alcan in the early 1950s. Sipekne'katik First Nation Chief Priscilla Mueller says Nechako translates to Big River, but the water is so low at the moment that people could walk to the middle of it.
Our concern is that the river flows are very low in the Nechako and has been since the Kenny Dam was built. And we just feel like not much has been done over the, even 11 years since we started kind of investigating and looking into the river.
Last month, nearly a dozen endangered white sturgeon were found dead in a 1-week period, according to the province of British Columbia. Provincial scientists have taken samples for laboratory testing, but they do not believe the fish died from disease, chemical exposure, or because of angling or gillnet fisheries. The fish show no visible signs of injury. The nations on the Nechako River have harvested sturgeon historically, but with the declines, Chief Mueller can't remember the last time it was harvested in her community. The salmon numbers are too low to catch as well. The Sipekne'katik First Nation have been in a lengthy legal battle with Rio Tinto, the federal and provincial government, over the Aboriginal right to fish the Nechako River. Earlier this year, the BC Supreme Court ruled that the Kenny Dam caused or contributed to a substantial decline in the Nechako white sturgeon and salmon populations.
Justice Kent's comments were, the government needs to step up and they need to regulate that flow. They need to give direction to Rio Tinto to regulate that flow and release more water. And that's what we're asking, that they release more water.
In an email statement to APTN News, Rio Tinto says they are aware of the sturgeon deaths in the Nechako and Fraser rivers, and they are working with local First Nations on the water flow. Over the last 2 years, Rio Tinto has been working with First Nations and local communities to improve the water flow into the Nechako River while still monitoring the flood risks in Vanderhoof. The First Nations say they have had talks with the BC government and are starting to talk with the federal government, but there is no progress. We contacted the federal government for a comment, but did not receive a response before airtime. Chief Mueller says they've been building a relationship with Rio Tinto for a few years, but the increase of the Nechako River flow isn't happening fast enough.
I just want to continue building our relationship with Rio Tinto, and but we need some decisions made quickly. We know our membership are not very happy, and I know the other communities are not very happy, and we are looking at next steps and what is our plan.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
That's all the time we have for this special edition of APTN National News. For more on the fisheries or news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.